Dit is maandag die 12de Februarie. Ons gaan aan met Destiny at thy call, we shall not falter. Bosoorlog verhaal geskryf deur Wynand de Tooy. Leslie Ann committed herself fully to her work. She worked with a strange urgency from early morning until late at night. When most of the work in the hospital was finished, she headed out with her Land Rover to the field posts nearby to treat local people who always seemed in need for medical attention. When she finally arrived at the single quarters late at night, she was so exhausted that she fell asleep almost instantly, only to be back at her post or on her post long before the required time. After the fourth day, she was so exhausted that she could hardly carry on. The senior medical officer sent her home to rest, but she was back on her post within 5 hours, insisting that she was fine and rested enough to work. But everyone could see that her thoughts were far from her work. They all had noticed that the almost visible pleasure in her eyes when the young recce captain was still in hospital, as well as the sudden change since the visit to Fort Fire. However, she stubbornly refused to talk about it. She splashed her face with water, trying to wash away the weariness. When she opened her eyes again, she found herself staring into the mirror. What she saw appalled her. Her face seemed drawn and lifeless, her eyes dull with dark smudges underneath, and her hair was combed back in a careless way. "Oh Lord," she whispered and closed her eyes. "What is happening to me? So many years went by, such a very, very long time, and what a delightful surprise it had been to find Tom again. It had been so wonderful to care for him, to just stand there and secretly watch him. There was a reawakening of a feeling which she had buried so deep inside her, a feeling, a dream which she had pampered for so many years and which she had started to think would never be fulfilled. And then, out of the blue, Tom came to revive all her love for him, just to tell her that he was getting married in 3 months' time. The revelation was bewildering. How could she be so naive as to think that he would be the same after all these years? With a sudden shock, she realized that she didn't really know Tom anymore. A lot had changed, and she must look forward. She just had to continue her life without him. Leslie Ann left the bathroom with new determination inside her. She approached the senior medical officer. "Colonel, I want to go home for the rest of the day." "We were worried about you. Of course you can go home. There's not much work on the floor and I believe we will survive without you for the rest of the day." He smiled warmly and winked. "I was afraid that you might have caught some kind of strange virus." "It's called first love, Colonel, but I'm certainly over it now." And as she closed the office door behind her, the smile was replaced by a deep frown on his face. Leslie Ann was a lovely child and a fine medical officer. He didn't want to see her hurt. Chapter 3. The coffin was draped in the colors of the national flag, orange, white, and blue, with Jimmy's maroon beret on top. The trumpet was glaring in the afternoon sunlight as the soft notes of the last post flowed from it. The guard of honor stood side by side at the grave, hands raised to the heads in a last show of respect to a fallen comrade. The intense heat of the October afternoon clamped down on those gathered around the open grave. The flag and beret were removed, and with a flick of a switch, the coffin slowly descended into the grave. A smothered scream escaped the young widow's mouth as she sank to the ground, crying uncontrollably, with family members supporting her on either side. Her hands clawed the sand as she desperately reached for the disappearing coffin. Jimmy! Oh, Jimmy! Tom spun away from the grave, desperately fighting to control the tears as he walked away briskly between the tombstones, away from the people, his own emotions in turmoil. He walked right up to the fence and gripped it with both hands to steady himself. "Oh Lord, how many more times must I watch this?" he whispered softly. "How many good young men have to die during this never-ending war? How many young widows have been left behind?" He fumbled for a cigarette, lit it, and turned to watch the rest of the proceedings. Quietly, he stood there watching, smoking and thinking until everyone had left, except for a few of his unit's men. He walked up to the grave and wordlessly picked up a shovel and started shoveling sand onto the coffin. After a short while, he handed the shovel to the next soldier, who in turn shoveled ground into the grave. Tom stood close by, watching as the rest of the men, one after the other, paid their respects to the fallen comrade and friend by filling the grave themselves. At last it was over. Tom saluted the grave and turned to where the lonely figure in black stood watching them. Annie van der Merwe appeared frail and weary, and the dark shadows under her eyes betrayed her sorrow. Tom placed both hands on her shoulders and stared deep into the teary eyes. With a soft cry, she buried her face in his shoulder, and he held her as sorrowful sobs raked her body. He let her cry until she finally looked up to him. "Jimmy? He was my friend," he said simply. "He died bravely. I loved him. He loved you too." Tom tried to smile. "Here, this is for you." From his pocket he took Jimmy's beret and medals. "Give this to his son one day and tell him about his dad." She clutched it to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. With tears streaming down her cheeks, she hurried away to the waiting car. Tom dropped Snytbasson off at the airport and swung the car to the N2 highway towards Stellenbosch. The BMW was willing, and 30 minutes later he turned in through the impressive gates of his father's estate. "McLachlan Wineries," he read out loud and noticed really the 30-kilometer speed limit sign next to the paved driveway that led straight up to the homestead half a mile away. Lush green vineyards flanked the side of the road, and despite everything, Tom was impressed by the marvelous view as the sun disappeared over False Bay. The Cape Dutch mansion with its thatched roof stood sharply edged against the background of Simonsburg. The gardens with its rolling lawns stretched for half a mile in front of the stoep, with significant oak trees scattered all over the garden. To the side and behind stood the century-old winery in the same fashion as the house, while a modern store was well hidden from sight by a little stone koppie. At this time of the evening, there was almost no activity except for the lights blazing on the porch. Tom drove around the mansion and stopped in front of his thatch rondavel overlooking most of the farmyard. The 3 dogs rushed to him with wagging tails, and much to their disappointment, Tom quickly stepped into the rondavel and closed the door behind him. He sighed. He was still in uniform, and knowing his father's antagonism towards the Defence Force, it was better to avoid yet another confrontation. He quickly changed into something more suitable for his parents' taste. The beret had flattened his hair and he had to wet it before he could comb it. Readjusting his bow tie, he stepped out in the brisk evening air and paused on the steps. It is beautiful, he thought. This farm had been in the family for more than a century, and one day it was to be his. He loved the farm. Only he wished his parents could have been less conservative in their outlook and less liberal in their politics. Tom entered through the kitchen and almost bumped into old Sina, the colored woman who had been working for the family as long as he can remember. "Hey, Master Tom," she yelled. "Naughty of you to give me such a fright. And why are you so late? The master and madam have already had dinner." Tom chuckled. "Sorry, Sina, I didn't plan to frighten you, but I'm late and you know how they are." Sina was immediately contrite. "They can't wait. Tell me, the funeral, touching, hey?" "He was my friend, Sina, and under my command." "Ai, Jerikkie toch, Master Tom. I'm so terribly sad every time one of our brave boys fall on the border. You must take good care of yourself. I will die if anything happens to you, and you should wear your uniform around so that people can see what my Master Tom has become." Tom smiled fondly. "Thank you, Sina, but you know my dad." "Yeah, I know him. You better go in now, they're waiting for you in the study." "Both of them?" She nodded. "It sounds serious. They told me to send you straight in as soon as you are ready." Tom knocked on the heavy mahogany door and pushed it open. His father was sitting behind a large desk smoking a cigar. His mother was sitting quite stiffly on a chair nearby. He kissed his mother on the cheek and shook his father's hands. "Tom," his father said past his cigar, "we must talk." Tom nodded, but said nothing. He had been expecting this ever since he came home a week before. There had been a reservedness in his parents' manner which was strange to him. "Your mother and I decided that you should resign from the army and come home." He flicked a glance at his wife's direction, and her attitude seemed haughty and withdrawn. "I also talked to Josh Fairland, and we have decided that you and Cecile will marry on the 14th of December. "Do I have a say?" Tom inquired expressionless, but deep inside him he was suddenly boiling with rage. How the hell could they dare to arrange his life? How dare they treat him like a teenager? "No, you don't. Remember, ever since you were a boy, it was decided that you and Cecile will marry one day." "The hell with it." Tom was on his feet. "You know I don't love Cecile. And love? You don't have to love her now. It's something that comes over the years. How many times must I tell you that once the two of you are married, we can amalgamate McLaughlin and Fairland's wineries? We will be the biggest." Tom shook his head and sad disdain. "It's all that you can think about. Your money, your own selfish world, and what?" his father bellowed, suddenly very annoyed. "I'm 25 years old. I have a well-carved career. I'm in the elite corps of the army." "Yeah? I should never have given you permission." "You didn't, Dad. I had to wait until I was 21 before I could join the Reckies. It was my decision and I will decide when to resign." Barry McLaughlin leaned forward against the desk, his face seething with anger. "I'm telling you now, you're finished with the damn army and that stupid Recce outfit of yours. You and Cecile will get married on the 14th of December and you will fill your place here come January the 1st. Tom glared furiously at his father, their faces only inches apart. "If not, boy," his father hissed, "you will not inherit 1 cent from me." Tom spun around, facing his mother. And you, Mom, is this what you want? Your father and I have decided, Tom. Her voice was soft and apologetic. For a brief moment, he even felt sorry for her. She was completely dominated by his father and she would never object to anything he said. He started for the door, knowing that nothing in the world would change his father's attitude. Tom, his mother stopped him softly. Cecile is expecting you tonight. She has called twice already. His evening with Cecile Fairland was a disaster. She kept him waiting for a whole 20 minutes before she appeared, dressed in a black evening dress that fitted her body like a second skin. Her earrings were too big for his taste and her black hair was pulled high on her head. Yet, he had to admit that she was more than pretty, with a marvelous figure and a charming way about her. He was more interested in a drink at a quiet pub, but instead he took her to a la carte restaurant in the Cape Sun Hotel, where they dined on oysters and lobster at a price that certainly didn't suit the pocket of a soldier. He wanted to be alone, all by himself, and she wanted to talk about the wedding. Even his moody silence didn't bother her as she chatted about the wedding invitations, her bride's gear, and the honeymoon. Even the color of his bow tie came up. It was well past 11 when he dropped her off at her parents' place. After explaining that he had had a rather hectic day, she reluctantly let him go. He promised that they could go shopping the next day. Tom didn't feel like going home yet, so he drove to Stellenbosch and went into the first pub that was still open. He ordered a double rum and coke and slumped onto a seat in the corner. His thoughts were in turmoil about the day's happenings. Jimmy's funeral, Anine and her little boy, his father's ultimatum, and Cecile. He still couldn't really see himself getting married to her. But what choice did he have? He would love to manage his father's farm, but his father was only 53, still young, and to work with or under him would be utterly unbearable, and that with the beautiful Cecile by his side. He would be envied by almost every young man in the district, but would he be able to learn to love her? But alas, it wasn't Cecile's face he saw, but that of Leslie Ann. The blue eyes taunting him, he felt those soft lips under his hand again. With an angry grunt, he slammed his fist on the counter so that even the bartender looked startled. A sharp pain shot up in his shoulder, immediately reminding him of his arm and the wall. "Hell," he muttered as he stumbled to his feet. "Nobody around here cares about it. Not his parents or Cecile even asked about Jimmy's funeral." Tom had joined the permanent force after just 6 months as a member of one parachute battalion. By that time, there was little left of the schoolboy drill sergeant. He was exhilarated when his officer's selection was successful. The formative training, the promotion courses all went above average well, and the more Tom indulged in his military career, the angrier and more frustrated his father had become. Barry McLachlan could not understand his son's infatuation with the military. It angered him even more when he noted the quiet acceptance up to the point of open support that his wife bestowed upon Tom, their only son. And Barry had dreams of his own, now destroyed by his interest of the military and border war, which he felt was an utter waste of time and lives. He would rather have liked to see his son in Bordeaux in France, studying and learning the art of winemaking, to promote the family business rather than embracing the politics of the National Party government, which of course he detested. Since the fall of the United Party, he had sided with the PFP, and only to advance his own interests, using the few parliamentarians to bend the rules and laws to fit his own causes. And Tom had continued his military career. He did Special Forces selection, suffered, and almost decided to abandon it when he received a letter from his father that demanded his immediate resignation. That was all the motivation he needed to successfully complete the selection and the cruel 42 weeks of training. He became a member of one reconnaissance regiment, and 2 years later was transferred to 4 Reconnaissance Regiment, which slowly changed his career in a seaborne direction. His life and career was on track, but inherently, Tom wanted his father's support or approval and acceptance of the fact that his son would eventually return to the farm. But it was exactly the attitude of his parents, their lack of interest and support, that made him hesitant about joint farming. The two of them on one farm, it could never work. Tom, as was the case of the majority of young white South Africans, had been swept up in the wave of nationalism, the protection of the South African borders, their duty, the safety of their family and businesses, their cause. South Africa was the last stronghold of white rule in Africa, the threat of communism ominous. And as dedicated as he was, as opposed to radicalism, his father, Barry McLachlan, was at the opposite spectrum of the white population. But Tom suspected that his father saw the tantalizing wine markets of Europe and the world and couldn't care less about the border war, communism and black rule. As long as he could sell more wine, he was in support of change. In 2 days' time, he would return to the border, to Fort Fire, where he will continue his duty until it became time to return to his unit in Langebaan, or to the farm as a civilian, a wine farmer, so that his father could expand his empire. It was late that night when Tom finally entered his rondavel, and sleep came much later. Chapter 4. The Cuban convoy left Chibemba at dawn. 300 grueling kilometers of utterly bad dust road stretched before them towards their destination, Kahama, the stronghold right in front of the line and the key to the province of Namibe, and of such great importance that no cost or effort would deter the high command in Luanda. 5 brigades were already assembled there, and it needed huge logistical support. Lieutenant Colonel Fernando Donacio glanced at his Chinese-made wristwatch with impatience. 9 o'clock in the morning, and the heat was already suffocating. Not that heat was something he was not used to. After all, Cuba was in Central America, on the equator, but this intense dry heat was something different, with a never-ending dust and the danger of ambush always present, no matter the time of day. He wiped his dirt-streaked forehead with the back of his hand and sighed. It was a long, long way from Mother Cuba. What the hell Fidel and the Central Committee saw in this God-forsaken country, he didn't know, and there was still no end in sight. The South Africans and UNITA bandits were giving them all hell with uncountable casualties over the last couple of weeks. Yet he knew that somehow they got to strike back to boost the sagging morale of the combined Cuban and FAPLA forces. Looking back to his convoy, he could see the beginning of just such a move. 25 tank carriers apart from a further 30 trucks almost overloaded with armament and food for the forces of Kahama. Leading the convoy were 2 BRDM armed cars, followed by 6 BTR troop carriers and then his command BRDM. The rear was brought up by a further 6 BTRs, and involuntarily he grinned satisfied. Let them try, he thought grimly. Let them try anything, and he would teach those bandits a thing or two. They reached the halfway mark 3 hours later. With grim approval, he noticed one of the BTRs slowed almost unnoticeably. Lifting his binoculars, he saw the figures in full combat fatigues, jumping down the sides with trained expertise. Some of them executed a roll as they hit the dirt road. Within moments, they disappeared into the thick bush. As his vehicle passed the spot, he saw one soldier propped on his knee, giving him a clenched fist salute. Fernando returned the salute with a smile as the impressive figure was enveloped by a swirling dust. Go well, my friend, he muttered and returned his attention to the front of the convoy. Part of his mission was complete. Mamba knelt over the map spread in the shade of a mopane tree. In a semicircle around him were his carefully selected men of SWAPO's special unit. They were a tough bunch. He handpicked every one of them and spent another 6 months training them until he was finally satisfied. And this was their first mission under his command. Right here, Mamba circled an area on the map. Right here somewhere are the Boers, small teams at work. He spoke Ovambo and eyed each of the 15 men in turn. They stared back at him, their black faces attentive, respectful, for it was a great honor to work with the notorious and feared Mamba. A traitor amongst the Boers, he boasted a little. Sent a word that there are 4 small teams at work in this area. And comrades, he paused for emphasis. You know how important it is that they don't find out what's happening at Kahama. The Angolan president has asked our noble and honorable leader, President Sam Nujoma, to assist our comrades in arms. The Cubans and Faplas to rid the province of Namibe and Kwandu Kubangu of the racist Boers and UNITA bandits. Now, as you well know, our comrades are planning a devastating onslaught against the Boer lines at Zangongu, and it is our mission to clean this mountainous countryside of Boer reconnaissance teams. First, we shall show them that we are here and we'll look for signs. From the chest pocket of his faded khaki, he took a handful of folded papers. We shall wear them out, make them thirsty, and force them to withdraw and kill them while doing so. As from this moment, we shall split in 2 and cover all the water holes in this area. At every water hole, you will leave one of these notes. Within days, they will dirt themselves. A snigger and some noisy grunts displayed their approval, and Mamba nodded. Good, we'll meet again by next Sunday at the beacon south of here. He watched as everyone marked their maps accordingly. He refolded his own into a leg pocket and rose to his feet. 5 feet 8 inches tall, he was powerfully built so that the shirt stretched across the wide shoulders. A Cuban cap perched on his head, and the wide-open face with the lively, wakeful eyes displayed an intelligence that was immediately noticed by his mentors many years before. Timothy Shigongu had completed his school career in Cuba and graduated from the Havana University 4 years later. By that time, his capabilities and intense interest in the African politics, as well as his deep hatred towards the South African illegally accompanying his country of birth, attracted the attention of the Cuban military. He had spent 3 years in officer training and specialized in guerrilla tactics. Then he fought with the Sandinista rebels for a year until their revolution was successful. After that, he was sent back to Angola. His success with deep infiltrations into Ovambo soon reached the ears of the Plan High Command. He was occasionally sent on secret missions to Namibia, and every time he returned with excellent information about the Boer installations in the country. It was during that time that he had earned the combat name of Mamba. Only once did he fail in a mission. He had walked into a Boer ambush and lost all his men. Wounded and bleeding badly, he managed to crawl from the arc of fire and made his way back to the Fapla lines 200 kilometers to the north. And now he's back with a new team and renewed strength. Dankie dat jy saam geluister het. Geniet die res van jou aand. Ek lees môre weer verder. Dankie dat jy like, subscribe, share en die belbutton druk. Ek waardeer ook die finansiële bydraes vir die video's en almal se opbouende terugvoer. Ek sal weer op 'n stadium gesels oor die hoofpyn en die proses waarmee gepaard gaan en so aan. Daar is van die kykers wat daaroor gevra het. Dankie, nogmaals dankie vir almal se ondersteuning en bydraes.